Mara Voss hated messes. The Deathworlders' headquarters reeked of smoke and spilled blood. Kale had spent hours pacing, his fists clenched, while Mara pieced together the ambush. She wasn't a fighter. She was the one who cleaned up disasters. But Layla's death wasn't just a disaster. It was a message. Mara returned to the ruins where Layla died. The ground was still charred, the air thick with the smell of burnt metal. Most of the clan had already scavenged the wreckage, but Mara searched where others hadn't. The corners, the cracks, the shadows. Under a half-melted girder, she found it. A data chip, cracked but intact. The Syndicate's bombers had left it behind. Back at the compound, Mara plugged the chip into a terminal. Static flickered, then a voice. "The girl's route is confirmed. Wait for my signal." The message was time-stamped hours before Layla's death. The sender's code traced back to Darius Cole. But that wasn't the worst part. The chip also held coordinates, not just for Layla's route, but for 3 other Deathworlder safe houses. Darius hadn't just wanted chaos. He'd wanted Cal's clan to retaliate, to show the galaxy how monstrous they could be. Mara confronted Cal in the armory. He was sharpening a knife, his eyes hollow. "Darius didn't act alone," she said, sliding the chip across the table. "He's been feeding us to the wolves for months. And Leela," she hesitated. "She was a test, a way to make you snap." Cal's knife hit the table with a thud. "Then we give him what he wants." Mara blocked his path. "No, this isn't a fight we can win with bullets. Darius has allies, planets, corporations. If we strike him, they'll all turn on us." Cal's laugh was bitter. "You think I care? Let them come. Let them burn." Before Mara could argue, the door slammed open. A scout stood in the frame, panting. "Darius is broadcasting. Says he'll surrender if you meet him alone." Cal's grin was razor-sharp. Perfect. The meeting happened in the Badlands, a stretch of Vexillan's desert where the wind stripped flesh from bone. Darius Cole stood flanked by guards, sleek in his tailored suit. "Cal," he said, smiling, "I'm glad you came. We can still avoid." Cal shot him. The bullet tore through Darius's shoulder, dropping him to his knees. "You think I'm here to negotiate?" Cal hissed, stepping closer. "You killed my sister. You set this whole game in motion. So let's end it." Darius spat blood. "You're making a mistake. The galaxy won't stand by while you." Cal shot him again, and again, and again. When he finally stopped, Darius was gone. Not just dead, erased. Mara watched from a ridge, her face unreadable. The galaxy would call this a massacre, a war crime. But as Cal holstered his gun, she nodded. The rules were dead. Now the real fight began. Darius Cole's orbital fortress hung above Vexillan like a knife poised to strike. Its jagged spires bristled with cannons, and its halls were lined with guards. No one breached the Iron Crown. No one except the Deathworlders. Mara Voss led the assault. She'd spent days studying the fortress's blueprints, hunting for weaknesses. The answer came in a stolen data core from a Syndicate freighter. "Their security systems reset every midnight," she told Cal. "A flaw in the coding. We have 1 minute to slip through." The Deathworlders moved at dawn. Mara hacked the outer defenses, her fingers flying over the terminal. Alarms blared, but the turrets went silent, a flicker of stolen time. "Now," she shouted. They stormed the station. Cal went first, his rifle cutting down guards. The rest followed, silent and relentless. Mara stayed behind, rerouting power to the fortress's core. Lights flickered. Bulkheads slammed shut, trapping Darius's men in corridors. By the time they reached the command center, the air smelled of burnt wiring and panic. Darius stood alone, his suit torn, his face pale. "You're insane," he gasped. "The galaxy will crush you for this." Cal smiled. "Let them try." Darius dropped to his knees. "Mercy, Cal. I'll give you anything." "Credits," ships, anything. Cal's voice was ice. You had your chance. The shot echoed through the station. When it was done, Mara stepped over Darius's body. The core's set to overload, she said. We have 10 minutes. They left as the fortress crumbled. On Vexillan's surface, crowds watched the sky burn. News feeds buzzed with footage of the Iron Crown's collapse. Analysts called it a tragedy, a disaster. But the galaxy knew the truth. The Deathworlders had stopped playing games. The Deathworlders' victory was short-lived. Across the galaxy, fear turned to fury. Planets that had paid tribute to Cal's clan now rebelled. On Tycho 9, a mining colony, alarms blared as a Deathworlder squad descended. They came for supplies, but this time they left no survivors. Ethan Cross was there. A young pilot with a knack for trouble, Ethan had been hired to deliver medical supplies to Tycho 9. He'd heard the rumors about the Deathworlders' new tactics, but hadn't believed them. Not until he saw the bodies. The attack was over in minutes. Miners, engineers, even children, gunned down in the streets. Ethan hid in a storage locker, his breath shallow, as the killers laughed outside. When silence fell, he crawled to the hangar, his ship prepped for launch. A guard spotted him. Ethan fired blindly, his hands shaking, and ran. He escaped, but the guilt clung to him. News of Tycho 9 spread like wildfire. Footage of the massacre aired on every channel. For the first time, the galaxy saw the Deathworlders not as mercenaries, but as monsters. And Ethan Cross, the pilot who'd fled, became a symbol, a face to rally behind. On Corva Prime, a farming world, Ethan addressed a crowd. They think we're sheep, he shouted, his voice raw. But we're not. We're done running. The crowd roared. Meanwhile, Cal watched the broadcasts, amused. Let them scream, he told Mara. They'll learn loyalty the hard way. But Mara wasn't so sure. She'd seen the footage of Ethan's speech, the fire in his eyes. This isn't fear, she said. It's defiance. And defiance spreads. She was right. On New Corinth, dockworkers sabotaged a Deathworlder freighter. On Ryloth, a hacker leaked the clan's supply routes. Even small acts of rebellion chipped away at Cal's control. Ethan, now leading a makeshift militia, hunted for allies. He found them in unexpected places. Retired soldiers, smugglers, even ex-Deathworlders disillusioned by Cal's brutality. They called themselves the Unbroken. Their first mission was a Deathworlder outpost on Vexillan. Ethan's plan was simple. Hit hard, vanish fast. They destroyed supply caches and freed prisoners. No casualties, just a message. We're still here. Cal seethed. Crush them, he ordered. But Mara hesitated. The galaxy was changing, and not even the Deathworlders could kill every star in the sky. Ethan, meanwhile, kept fighting. Not for revenge, but for the future. A future where no one had to hide. The war had just begun. Mara Voss hated traitors. The Deathworlders' network of spies had always been a rumor, whispers of informants selling secrets to the highest bidder. But after Tycho 9, Mara knew the leaks weren't random. Someone was feeding Cal's enemies precise information. She started digging. The clues led her to an abandoned med lab on Vexillan's outskirts. Its walls were lined with broken terminals, but one still flickered, a ghost in the system. Mara plugged in, her eyes scanning lines of code. A name popped up. Dr. Sophia Rice. Sophia had been a medic for the Deathworlders years ago, before vanishing. Now she was sending encrypted messages to Darius Cole's allies. Mara found her in a cramped apartment on New Corinth, surrounded by holograms of her past. Sophia's hand shook as she deleted files. I knew you'd come, she said without turning. Why? Mara asked. Sophia faced her, eyes tired. Cal's clan was supposed to protect people. Instead, you became tyrants. Darius promised to stop you. By killing Leela. Mara's voice was steel. Sophia flinched. That wasn't supposed to happen. Darius swore he'd only target safe houses. But when Leela crossed his path, she trailed off. Mara's pistol clicked. Join us or die. That's the offer. Sophia laughed, bitter. You think I'd help you, after what you've done? Then you leave me no choice. The shot was quick. Sophia crumpled, her blood pooling on the floor. Mara didn't blink. But as she left, she noticed something on Sophia's terminal, a symbol half hidden in the files. A serpent coiled around a star. The mark of the Eclipse Consortium, a shadowy alliance of corporations and crime lords. Mara's blood ran cold. Darius hadn't acted alone. He'd been a pawn. And the real enemy was still out there. Ethan Cross wasn't stupid. His militia had spent weeks tracking the Deathworlder supply convoy, a dozen armored trucks hauling weapons through the salt flats of Ryloth. The plan was risky. Ambush the convoy, steal the weapons, and vanish. But the Unbroken needed firepower, and Ethan was done waiting. The attack began at dawn. Ethan's team disabled the lead truck with a roadside bomb, then opened fire. The Deathworlders fought back, but the Unbroken had numbers. And surprise. By the time the dust settled, 3 trucks were theirs. Inside, they found more than guns. Crates of advanced tech, prototype railguns, shield generators, and something labeled Project Eclipse. Ethan didn't know what it meant, but he knew it was valuable. He didn't know Kel was watching. The Deathworlder leader had tracked the stolen supplies to a hidden base in the mountains. When he arrived, he didn't bring an army, just Mara and a handful of soldiers. Ethan stood ready, railgun in hand. Cale stepped into the light, unarmed. Impressive, he said, eyeing the loot. You've got guts, kid. Save it. Ethan snapped. You're not taking this. Cale smirked. What if I want to give you something? He nodded at the railgun. That weapon? It's a key. The Eclipse Consortium built it. They're the ones pulling the strings. The ones who killed Lila. Ethan froze. Why tell me? Because you're not like the others, Cale said. You fight for something real. Join me. Help me burn the consortium to ash. Mara glared. This is a mistake. But Cale ignored her. Think about it. He told Ethan. The galaxy's a machine. The consortium oils the gears. You and me, we're the wrench. He left without a fight, leaving the railgun behind. That night, Ethan stared at the weapon, its barrel gleaming. The consortium. The name felt like a clue, a thread to unravel the chaos. But trusting Cull, that felt like stepping into a trap. The war was getting bigger, and Ethan wasn't sure who his enemies were anymore. Ethan Cross found Jessa Vorn in a cantina on the edge of the lawless moon, Naxos. The air reeked of cheap whiskey and desperation. Jessa was exactly as rumored. A smuggler with a smirk, her boots propped on a table and a blaster holstered at her hip. You're the one asking about the Deathworlders, she said, not looking up from her drink. Ethan slid into the seat across from her. I need answers. About Cale. Jessa laughed. Everyone needs something. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. What do you know about the clan's real story? Cal's a killer, Ethan said. That's all I need to know. Wrong, Jessa snapped. Once, they were heroes. Freedom fighters. The galaxy's forgotten. But I was there. Cal's father led the clan back then, fighting syndicates that enslaved colonies. They won, for a while. She took a swig of whiskey. Then the syndicates retaliated, bombed a school on Cal's homeworld. His mother died there. After that, Cal's father, broke, turned the clan into weapons. Syndicates paid him to erase problems. And when he died, Cal took over, became worse. Ethan frowned. Why tell me this? Because the Eclipse Consortium didn't just kill Layla, Jessa said. They've been pulling strings for decades. They destroyed Cal's family. Used him. All of us. She tapped the railgun Ethan carried. That weapon. It's part of their plan. They want chaos. Kel's just their latest puppet. Ethan's grip tightened. So what do we do? Jessa grinned. We burn the puppeteers. The next morning, Ethan's militia met Jessa's crew in a hidden hangar. Jessa tossed him a data chip. Coordinates to an Eclipse lab. They're building something big. If we hit them there, we cripple their operations. Ethan hesitated. Working with a smuggler, even one who hated the consortium, felt risky. But Kel's words haunted him. You're not like the others. All right, he said, but we do this my way. No killing. Not unless we have to. Jessa shrugged. Your call. But remember, the consortium doesn't play nice. As the ships launched, Ethan wondered if he'd just allied with the enemy, or if the enemy had been someone else all along. New Corinth was a fortress of glass and steel, its towers piercing the clouds. The corporate hub thrived on greed. Its banks funded wars. Its factories built weapons, and its leaders answered to the Eclipse Consortium. For weeks, Kale had planned to burn it to the ground. Mara started the siege. From a hidden terminal, she hacked New Corinth's defenses, her fingers dancing across the keys. Screens flickered as she disabled turrets, unlocked gates, and shut down power grids. Your turn, she told Kale. The Deathworlders stormed the city. Kale led the charge, his rifle blazing. Guards fell, alarms wailed, and civilians fled. But New Corinth's true weapon wasn't its tech, it was its secrets. In a vault beneath the central spire, files revealed Eclipse's crimes. Rigged elections, assassinations, even Lila's death ordered as a test for Kale. Ethan arrived as the city burned. With Jess's help, he breached the walls using the prototype railgun. The weapon hummed, its blue energy tearing through Deathworlder tanks. Fall back, Mara shouted, spotting the threat. Kale grinned. Finally, a challenge. The two forces clashed in the streets. Ethan fired the railgun. Each shot crippling Cal's men. Mara countered, hacking the weapons systems to overload it. Sparks flew. Ethan ducked, his shields failing. You're fighting the wrong enemy. Mara snarled, lunging at him. Ethan blocked her strike. Then tell me who to fight. Before she could answer, an explosion rocked the city. The central spire's vault had been breached. Eclipse's files were gone. Kale froze. The data pads in his hands showed the truth. The consortium had manipulated him, used Layla's death to turn him into a weapon. Kale, Mara shouted, we need to go. But Kale didn't move. The galaxy's corruption ran deeper than he'd imagined. Ethan grabbed the files and retreated, Jessa covering him. As they fled, he glanced back. The Deathworlders were withdrawing, their victory ashes. New Corinth's leaders would rebuild. But the war had changed. Jessa Vorn decrypted the stolen files in a dimly lit safehouse. The data overwhelmed her. Lists of bribes, assassinations, and one name repeating like a curse. Counselor Varys. The Eclipse Consortium's leader wasn't a shadowy figure. He was a high-ranking official in the Galactic Senate, manipulating wars for profit. Kale was never the monster, Jessa muttered. He was the weapon. She shared the files with Ethan. The consortium used Leela's death to turn him into a madman. They wanted him to destroy everything. Chaos sells weapons, kid. Ethan's hands trembled. We have to tell him. Mara found Kale in the ruins of New Corinth, staring at the city's ashes. We were wrong, she said, handing him the files. Kale read in silence. His sister's death, the raids, the rage. It had all been a script. Counselor Varys had written it. Varys dies, Kale said finally. Not for revenge. For order. Mara hesitated. The consortium's too powerful, even for us. Then we burn them all. Ethan leaked the files to the galaxy. News networks erupted. Protests swelled outside Senate halls. Counselor Varys, caught in the open, denied everything, until a recording aired of him ordering Layla's death. The galaxy's anger turned to Varys. But the consortium struck back. A fleet of warships, hidden for decades, emerged from the void. Their target, Vexillon. Kale watched the ships descend. "They're here for us," he told Mara. "But we're not hiding." Mara nodded. "Then let's give them a war they'll regret." Ethan rallied the unbroken. "This isn't about Kale anymore," he said. "It's about stopping Varys. If the consortium wins, no one's free." Jessa loaded her ship with explosives. Time to crash a party. As the fleets clashed, one truth echoed. The Deathworlders' rage had exposed the rot. Now the galaxy would fight to root it out. But the cost would be high. The battle for Vexillon was a storm of fire and metal. Eclipse's warships blotted out the sky, their cannons tearing into the planet. Kale stood on the battlefield, his rifle glowing from relentless fire. Beside him, Mara directed the Deathworlders with cold precision. "Target their engines," she barked. "We can't let them retreat." Above, Ethan and Jessa flew through the chaos, their ships dodging lasers. "Now," Jessa shouted. Ethan launched a missile at a carrier's reactor. It exploded, raining debris. But the real fight was in the heart of the flagship. Kale and Mara boarded the crumbling vessel, fighting through squads of Eclipse guards. At its core, they found Counselor Varys, a small man in a sleek suit, his face pale but smug. "You think this changes anything?" he sneered. "The galaxy needs people like me." Kale raised his gun. "No, it needs people like us." The shot echoed. The consortium's fleet broke, fleeing into the void. Vexillon's survivors cheered, but Kale felt no triumph. Too many had died. Mara stared at Varys's body. "It's over," she said. But Ethan knew better. The galaxy's corruption wouldn't vanish overnight. Still, the truth had spread. Varys's crimes were exposed. Protests toppled regimes. For the first time, there was hope. Weeks later, the Deathworlders disbanded. Kale vanished into Vexillon's wastes, leaving his clan to choose their own paths. Mara disappeared too, whispering of unfinished business. Ethan became a senator, pushing reforms. Jessa returned to smuggling, her ships now hauling medicine, not weapons. And the galaxy remembered. They remembered Lila's death, the siege of New Corinth, the day the Deathworlders stopped playing nice. Not as villains, but as a reckoning. But the cost would be high.